Hello, how are you today? And in this Inside Real Estate edition, we're going to talk about some local news. So recently, the city of Cambridge passed a new zoning ordinance that eliminated single-family zoning in the town of Cambridge. Now, this was hailed as a victory, but we're going to go into this a little bit more to kind of see what this means and is it really a victory? And does it really change anything for the city of Cambridge? So, with that said, we're going to dive right in here and we're going to talk about the impact that this is going to have on single family houses in the city of Cambridge. And while there are probably many parcels that have different answers to this question, what I can tell you is that if you have a larger lot and a smaller house on it, then that's going to be a place that's going to be ripe for multifamily development, either 2 units or 3 units or 4 units or whatever the current zoning allows, because it is no longer protected. It is no longer exclusively allowed to be single family zoning. And where it makes the most sense to take down a single family house and put up a multifamily building is when the house is small and the lot is big. And so basically, if you're in a small house on a decent sized lot in Cambridge, you should absolutely be calling a real estate expert to find out how much your land has gone up in value. It is probably significant. Now, a secondary impact of that is, will your assessment go up? Okay, your assessment has two parts in the city of Cambridge, as it does all throughout Massachusetts. It's the value of the house, which will not change, okay, relative to the market. It will stay roughly the same, but the land will now be worth quite a bit more in a certain number of situations, perhaps drastically more. But I'm not exactly sure that the city of Cambridge will change that assessment. It's too soon to know. Maybe they will only do it after looking at the sales data. That makes sense, but that will take like a year and a half. Maybe they will do it more aggressively and do it sooner. Very difficult to know how the city of Cambridge is going to handle that particular issue, and it's something that we'll all have to watch to see what happens. So if you've gotten this far, you may be saying, well, what's the big deal? Why do we have zoning anyway? If they're trying to get rid of certain elements of zoning, does zoning make any sense at all? And I think initially zoning made a lot of sense. Basically, when a lot of the land was being developed around here and cities and towns were forming, what they figured out pretty quickly is that if you were running a business or a factory, well, sometimes that had a lot of people, a lot of traffic, a lot of smoke, a lot of chemicals. I mean, you got to go back. This is before the EPA and a lot of other stuff, right? So, you know, industry in and of itself was pretty toxic and pretty messy. And for the most part, people didn't want to live there. So very quickly, they came up with this idea that what you really want to do is put industry over in one corner of the town or on its own separate little area, and then put the houses in the other way, in the other parts of town. And from that very simple solution, a lot of zoning changes started to develop. If we're going to separate the industrial property from the residential property, maybe we should start separating the apartment buildings from the single family houses. And so modern zoning continued to evolve, at least in Massachusetts, and we started to have lots of restrictions about where you could put what. And in today, it's not uncommon for a town of Massachusetts to have a zoning map that looks like this, with all of these colors representing all the kinds of different zones that are there. Now, a lot of the zones allow you to do very similar things, just in sort of different ways. A lot of times the zoning just has different setbacks. But fundamentally, what Cambridge is doing is going in the other direction. They're allowing more kinds of property to be built in a fewer number of zones. So I'll probably be the first to say that I think modern zoning has gotten too restrictive. I think there's too many rules, too many regulations. In fact, there are a lot of parts in the country that really have very limited zoning, at all, which basically means you can put up a 7-Eleven, put a house right next to it. Like, that's not that weird, and everything seems to be working fine. I'm not sure that having no zoning is the answer either, but it's probably somewhere between what most of the towns have today and where we started with no rules at all. The biggest problem I think people have with single family zoning, at least probably in Cambridge, is it looks very snobbish. There are other ways to probably say this, but It just sort of seems like those single families are gobbling up a lot of land at the expense of other people who would like to be in the city of Cambridge. So I think that that's a very popular narrative. I'm not really sure that it's accurate overall, because the problem is what you're really saying is that if you have less single family zoning, what you'll end up having is lower prices for housing for everyone else in Cambridge. I'm not sure that that's exactly what's going to happen at all. The problem is just by changing the zoning, what you've really done, as I've led to, as I've mentioned at the beginning of this, is you've changed the value of the land underneath. So once a builder or a developer realizes they can now put 2 units on that lot, yes, you will end up with 2 units where you had one before, but the price that he paid for the underlying land has gone up. And because of that, in order to get his money back and make a profit on this, he has to charge market rate prices. So you end up with more units, but I'm not really sure you see a lot of price decreases. In fact, because they're newer units, these units will probably set the market, especially since they're going to be in an area that's mostly single families. I think from an economics perspective, it's very difficult for me to see how this relatively simple zoning change is going to result in a massive influx of homes and a fall or some sort of decrease in Cambridge prices. Don't really think that's likely to happen at all. And first of all, a lot of the people that own single families aren't going to be selling. But there are going to be some people that sell, and maybe when those multifamilies go up right next door, they're going to wonder whether they should sell too. That might, in the short term, push prices down. But I think long term, I don't think that there's going to be enough turnover to reach. So hopefully you can see from this brief discussion here that zoning is actually quite complex. There are really good reasons for it. Some of those reasons don't exist today, and I think there's an argument to be made that it's overly restrictive. Cambridge has taken the first step in probably a very long journey to straighten that out, but it won't be without impacts, and I'm sure not everyone is going to be happy with how this works out. That's my Inside Real Estate Minute for this week, and I hope you enjoyed it.